Welcome to everyone who's watching. The Meishidia Foundation Media Institute is conducting this panel entitled Negotiations on the Lebanese-Israeli Maritime Border under the project Renewing Lebanon's Political and Economic Structures in partnership with the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. My speakers today are Ms. Lori Haitayan, Lebanese oil and gas expert in the Middle East and North Africa, Ambassador Frederick Hoff, diplomat in residence at Bard College, Diana Aisse, energy governance specialist, member of advisory board at the Lebanese Oil and Gas Initiative, David Schenker, Toby Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute and Director of the Program on Arabic Politics. I would like to ask my first question to Ms. Lori Haitayan. There are talks about setting a Lebanese sovereign fund for the gas revenues generated by Lebanon.
Yes.
Do you think that the country will be able to redistribute these revenues? If so, how?
So basically, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's an honor to be here with distinguished guests. Basically, according to the law that had been passed in 2010, the Lebanese government is required to establish a sovereign wealth fund to put all the revenues and proceeds from oil and gas. And this has been in 2010. So since 2010, there were changes that happened in the country. And actually today, with all the collapse that we're seeing and the financial collapse that we are seeing, we have to think, I guess, and reconsider if putting the proceeds and the revenues of oil and gas totally and completely into the sovereign wealth fund is the right choice, or there should be a different approach to this. First of all, let's see when these proceeds will come, how much these will be, and then secondly, we have to think of the governance of the sovereign wealth fund. This is according to a law that needs to be passed. Today, we do have 3 proposed laws in the parliament that have been, I don't recall that they've been discussed in details, so they need to be discussed by the parliament and to set up a really strong governance structure for the sovereign wealth fund, or else with the situation we are in today and the corruption level we are at, we will not see the benefits of putting this money into the sovereign wealth fund. It will be the black box and business as usual. But first, let's find oil. Let's develop this oil if we find it, or gas. So let's find the gas. Let's see if the gas that we will find, if we find, is commercial enough to develop it and produce it, and then see how much money we will be able to make and what we want to do with this money. And maybe we decide that, no, on the contrary, we want this money to go directly into the economy instead of going into a sovereign wealth fund. And if it's going to go directly to the economy, so then you need to have at least a yearly budget passed by the parliament, because the worst thing would be if you don't have a yearly budget passed by the parliament and have, like we have today, like every 10 years we decide to pass a budget that is a useless budget.
Okay, Ms. Diana Aisse, my next question is to you. So how is the equation, Karish in return for Kana, a fair one for Lebanon? Do we have sufficient information regarding the Kana reserves for us to trust that obtaining Kana is a win?
Okay. Again, thank you so much for this very relevant information. I think discussion of this type is quite timely, so to speak, and this is the understatement, I think, of the year. When it comes to putting Karish in front of Kana, I fail to see that this is, besides the point that it's fair or not, I don't think this is a plausible one. For the simple reason that Karish is already a discovered field. It has several wells that have been proven to be commercially viable. So the development plans were set. They're about to produce first gas. There has been, as we saw yesterday, tests, the reverse cycle test for first gas. So it's quite there. There is a company that is intent. There are market already contracts to sell the gas. So it's really in progress. And when it comes to Kana, what we have so far for Kana is a lot of promising seismic surveys. And usually these seismic surveys that result in data packages give you a good idea. They are, if I can call it that, an educated guess. But besides that, we cannot say that we have actually in our hands the gas. It's there. most probably, we're not that unlucky, let's face it.
But
all
are we
around
sure that
us,
it's there?
it's there, but it will take us several years to discover it. And most importantly, as my colleague just pointed out, we need serious investors to do that. We need this business cycle to be in place for the investors to come, for them to start the extractions, for them to be interested. So far, what we have is a good idea. It's called Qana. We have promising seismic surveys. We think there's something there. Most probably it is, but we are unable to extract it. It takes a certain degree of sophistication and expertise on the part of a handful of companies to be able to extract it. Not anybody can come and drill in our offshore. They need to have the expertise in drilling in deep water, and very few companies have. Again, not more than a handful worldwide, and they need to have the investment backbone to do so. So what we have so far is Total committed with a minimum work commitment to drill one well. I think we'll talk about that later on in block number 9. And in order for it to do that, it needs a minimum political as well as security stability to do that. And it has expressed it quite bluntly.
Ambassador Hoff, my next question is to you. Do you think that the boys' line is what's delaying the reach of a deal with Israel? Or is the fact that Israel wants compensation from Total Energy in return for the exploitation of Qana?
I am. First of all, let me say that I am deeply honored to be associated with anything involving the name May Shidiak. So thank you so much for the invitation. Not being part of the current American mediation, I have no definite knowledge of the specific issues that have been in dispute at the last minute. My understanding is that both issues you mentioned, the buoy line and the idea of unitizing in some manner the Qana field, both issues have come up. What I can say for sure, based on the mediation I was involved in 10 years ago, is that the 3-mile issue, the location of the buoy, was solved then through the simple expediency of starting the recommended maritime separation line 3 miles off the coast of Ras Al Daura. So I was surprised to see this issue resurface, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. Mr. David Schenker, I'd like to ask you a more political question. In a recent interview, you said that the deal on the maritime border demarcation between Lebanon and Israel would be considered a win for the Biden administration. Do you think that the Biden administration has helped in resolving the everlasting Middle Eastern crisis?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, and thank you to May for the invitation. It's a real pleasure. No, I think ultimately this may alleviate some tensions between Israel and Hezbollah on the maritime, but we see tensions spiking along the blue line. We see increased presence of so-called green without borders. We see Radwan forces, special forces of Hezbollah deployed to the south. We see increased intimidation and manhandling by Hezbollah of UNIFIL, undermining confidence, prevention of access to areas in Lebanon, including at sometimes seemingly with the support of the Lebanese armed forces, preventing UNIFIL where they need to go. So I think that this is something that will benefit Lebanon greatly, but it does nothing in terms of Hezbollah's goals, in terms of the prospects for the conflict elsewhere. And in fact, if a conflict does break out, that the maritime assets of both Israel and Lebanon but particularly those of Israel, will not be spared. I don't think Hezbollah will be bound to not target these when and if the balloon goes up.
Okay. Lori,
Yes.
so do you think that from a governance perspective, that the whole maritime dispute portfolio, how do you think that it was handled by the state, and what are the main challenges that could be cited as examples?
You mean our government?
Our government.
So basically, the approach of the government was, at the beginning when they started, it was like based on international maritime laws and the methodologies that were supposed to be adopted in the delimitation. But soon after, I guess they were faced with the reality that there was objection from the Israeli side and the US side to go beyond the 860 square kilometers of the dispute that we knew for 10 years. And therefore, they had to face the reality that either they stick to international maritime law and with line 29, and therefore there might be a risk that the negotiations will be stopped and the mediation will be stopped, or they had to be more flexible and adapt to what they were facing. And they the objective was refocused on resources rather than being a delimitation of the maritime borders according to international law. Okay. So when the president in February 2022 decided to let go of line 29, even if it was right for Lebanon, and to move on...
Sorry, I'm going to stop you. Why was it okay for Lebanon to abandon line 29? Because the Lebanese army wants line 29 and still pushes for it.
So today, the Lebanese army is not pushing anymore on line 29. The Lebanese army is saying that I stated my case. My case was line 29 according to the international law and according to the three-level methodology, which is about equidistant lines, special circumstances, and disproportionate impact methodology. And according to that, they thought that line 29 was the right approach, and line 29 was the right delimitation and the right border based on the Ras al Naura starting point, that our borders with Israel is Ras al Naura according to 1923 exactly agreement, and that they were the special circumstances here was Tekhelet, which was very close to the shores of Israel. They thought that they would give it zero effect in the maritime delimitation because of the disproportionate impact, because Lebanon would have lost a lot of spaces or area. So based on that, when the president was flexible, he was faced with reality that if these negotiations should move on, we have to go by line 23, because the Americans and the Israelis were very clear on that. And basically, the shift was from international law to how practical we should be and on resources and wanting to be able to exploit our resources, because the Lebanese government thought that this will support and help the recovery of the country. This will be, if you want, a tool they can use, a card they can use for the negotiations with the IMF, and this will ease the pressure from the US and from the international donors and from the IMF and the World Bank if we had to move on with this exploitation. So they felt that this was the only way. So the shift became, the objective became, we need to exploit oil and gas, and if prerequisite for exploiting oil and gas is the delimitation with the Israelis, let's move on with it. So the main incentive, or it was always there, but then it became so highlighted, was the economic incentive for the delimitation. The Israeli was more than economic, it was the security dimension. And for the US, it was always political. It's always good to bring Israelis and any Arab country to negotiate. So the point is that the shift became on the resources, and this is what we are seeing today. The problem is that we have shifted it into resources without exactly being sure that these resources exist. Yeah. So Karish exists, yes. So you can do a fight over it. Kana doesn't exist, and today it's surreal for me that it could be a deal breaker or a deal maker, something that doesn't exist even, like this prospect, potential oil and gas, potentially that we're fighting over the compensation and who's going to give the compensation to who and what are the mechanisms. So basically, this has been the shift that was made. So based on what the government thought would be the objectives, they shifted in the negotiations. And let's see if at the end of the day we will have the deal signed between Lebanon and Israel. Let's see. What my reading could be that before the 31st of October, before going into the presidential vacuum, we might have a deal. Because even Hezbollah, the biggest spoiler here from the Lebanese side, same as Mr. Netanyahu, and it's really it's again surreal to see that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, they're like tweeting each other's tweets, and the fans and the followers of Hassan Nasrallah tweet the followers of Netanyahu, and they feed into each other in the tweets. So this is like the tweet world is very interesting to see that kind of the dynamics over there. So Hezbollah, even when they did this equation of Qana versus Karish, they were very specific. They said that if Qana starts production before we have a deal, this will be a deal breaker. But they never said that Karish starts, Qana starts, because some think that if Karish starts and Qana didn't start, this is the deal breaker. No, it's like they just want to make sure that they have a deal. Hezbollah thinks, as the Lebanese government, that oil and gas could save the economy. Oil and gas could be something that they can use as in their negotiations. And this is something that maybe later we can talk, because this is not correct and it's not accurate. And with the circumstances and with the conditions we are living today, with the total collapse in politics, in socially and economically and financially, the oil and gas and the discoveries or the production of oil and gas will not save the country. On the contrary, there are risks of more corruption, more dictatorship, and more poverty.
Jana Aisse, how do you explain then Hezbollah's sudden optimism in reaching a deal with Israel?
Yes. Well, actually, as again, to restate, he is really reflecting what the state of leniency that we went into is really about. Putting aside the idea of Hezbollah leading on the actual negotiations, I utterly do not believe this is the case. We have a state that has gone through a process of maturity when it comes to maritime delineation, starting from 2007, when the Lebanese army forces were topographers, nothing more, until 2011, when they actually had to go and get an entity such as UKHO to do that study for them, leaning towards, then moving towards when the UKHO actually recommended that a hydrographic department initiated by the Lebanese army forces would start and should start looking at the shores of Lebanon in order, as a sovereign state, to develop their own position. Now, between this and that, there was a lot of developments. If I can just reflect quickly on the governance issue. When it comes to the Lebanese army forces, they did develop, kudos to them, the hydrographic division, and it took a lot of energy, studies, equipment, resources, programs, and they went actually to Naqoura and did all the field study, leading to 2018 for them to state that we actually have more than line 23, and this is something we can go back to. Now, from then until now, there has been a trajectory of putting on the table within the Lebanese state the claim for line 23. How it ended up being, unfolding is something that, again, we can discuss later on. But the state of the matter is that we had put on the table during the negotiations our line 23, which we can really justify both legally and, of course, legally and technically.
So line 23 is the right...
No, line 29.
Line 29. Sorry.
Yes, is okay. And we can again revisit this later on to see how did we end up becoming very lenient, just as a show of how willing we are to resolve these issues. And again, kudos to the state, because we are showing exceptional leniency. Of course, not to the point that it would be on account of really giving up more than we should be giving up when it comes to our natural resources. Now, when we are faced with this reality and we know that there are different stakes that need to be put on the table in order to make these negotiations move forward. I cannot really start pointing fingers inwards by saying so and so entity is raising the stakes by putting forward threats. This is not the time to do that. The moment now is to make sure that Lebanon walks off or out with a fair deal. And I don't think, honestly, that we can give up more to make it a fairer deal. I think we reached the limit of what we can do. And all eyes should be now on sticking to this threshold, not going an inch below what we are already demanding, including the buoyancy line, including all that we have stated so far, including the adjustments that we are requiring just to ensure that companies, whether it's Total or afterwards any other company, will not be faced with an Aphrodite-like situation where we say, yes, of course, we can move forward after arbitration. But when it comes to unfolding this resulting arbitration sentence, such as how much do I actually get as a percentage from Aphrodite, and this is the case between Israel and Cyprus now, there is always a delay in the negotiations because simply Israel is not satisfied with the percentage that is being proposed as compensation for Aphrodite. We don't want to end up in that situation. We know it can drag for years. What we want is to make sure that Lebanon, like any other sovereign state in the area, no, in the world, is able to benefit from its natural resources independent of any political pressure.
Thank you. I have another question. You tweeted a couple of days ago that the deal needed to be discussed within Parliament. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that way?
Yeah, from a governance perspective, and again reflecting on what's happening on the other side, the deal is actually
being... But it's not an international treaty.
No, it's not an international treaty. It's a discussion about a sovereign part of Lebanon. And when it comes to sovereignty, all stakeholders should be involved. Foremost are the representatives of the people, regardless of what we all think independently of the results. Yeah. Personally, I think they were really good. Okay. Of the parliamentary elections, we have 128 representatives of people, and they need to have a say when it comes to dealing with resources that are owned by the people. So I don't think, taking into consideration the complexity of the state and the political situation here, yes, that such a big issue such as maritime border dispute should be discussed in silos among the three representatives. And I want to end by saying I don't see actually why 128 deputies should not be looking at something that their speaker is actually looking at. It's not right from every single governance perspective.
Can I add one word on that?
Yes, of course.
Just about, because you said that this is not an international treaty, but we all remember when the negotiations started in October 2020, Mr. Birri said that now I give this portfolio, I put it in the hands of the president. I have nothing to do with it. Yes. I have been dealing with it for 10 years. And why was that the case? Because the president wanted to take back that portfolio from the hands of the Speaker of the Parliament. Why? Based on the provision of the Constitution, provision 52, that says that the President of the Republic negotiates on international treaties. So it's not whenever they want, it's an international treaty. Whenever they don't like it, it's not an international treaty. So whenever they want, it's a letter we will be sending to the UN. Whenever they want, it's just like whatever they want. So as Diana said, this is an important agreement that we are signing with Israel, we like it or not, even if it's mediated by the Americans. Therefore, the Parliament has to know what is it that we are signing on, being it a letter or not, or being it. So there are more details than being that just a letter. Letters will be sent to the UN. Yes, these are the coordinates. Yes, we will change the coordinates, etc., of the maritime border. But what happens with all the things that we're hearing about, like this compensation over Kana, about other deals, etc., or other details of the deal? These are where are these things put? What is the output or the outcome of these negotiations for 2 years? Where will these be put? And on what? On a letter that we will send to whom? To Santa Claus?
I hope not. Ambassador Hoff, Will the
Yes.
demarcation deal initiate the naturalization of relations between Lebanon and Israel?
I suspect not. I suspect normalization talks are a considerable way off, if for no other reason than Iran and Hezbollah would oppose them totally. And if I may, I'd like to comment on a couple of the excellent points that our colleagues there in Beirut have made. First of all, on line 29, let me just say for the record that line 29 either did not exist or was not brought up in the mediation I conducted 10 years ago. Line 23 was the consistent Lebanese position. I think the other point to make, and I think we're all generally aware of this, is that there is no single canonical mathematical method for drawing lines of this nature. A lot has to do with the weight one party to a dispute gives to the base points of the other party. When Israel came up with line 1, its methodology was based on discounting certain Lebanese base points, and we succeeded in showing the Israeli side that Lebanese base points were valid. By the same token, the Lebanese over the years have assigned various weights to Khaled Island off the coast of Haifa. One can create any number of lines that are in accordance with international law, which only dictates an equitable outcome. Whether we're talking about line 29, line 1, line 23, the so-called Hoff line.
Hoff line, your line.
Yeah, and I don't have any particular attachment to that line. I am delighted that the Lebanese seem to be coming up with a situation that gives them their original position. Line 23, when line 29 was first surfaced, whenever it was, a couple of years ago, year and a half ago, my immediate reaction was, this is a rather crude negotiating attempt to get back to line 23, which is probably not going to work. How wrong I proved to be. Lebanon has gotten back to line 23, but the main point I want to make is that none of these lines, not a single one, enshrines in and of itself the dictates of international law.
Thank you. Mr. Schenker, do you agree with this statement?
100%. Maritime boundary delineation is more of an art than a science. You can find whatever consultant you want to find to support your position and dig up whatever precedent you need to get your position. And what Ambassador Hoff, what Fred did when he was the envoy negotiating this so many years ago, was to basically, my understanding is go to the State Department map room and say, the geographers and say, how would the United States delineate its border, maritime border with Mexico? And what kind of weights would you give these points, these geographic points? And like Fred, I think I'm a little surprised that they got to 23. I also saw it on the eve of kicking off the negotiations as being really the oldest trick in the book, negotiating tactic. But once again, this is a negotiation between the parties, and so they can come to whatever solution that they see is in their interest. And I think there are economic interests and security interests that I think reasonably mitigate for an agreement. And if we, hit that sweet spot, that's great. I'll be happy for it if it makes Lebanon profitable, if the people of Lebanon benefit from their natural resources, and the people of Israel have more security. I think that would be a good deal all the way around. But this is for the parties to decide ultimately.
So you think
And
that?
if I may add just one quick comment about the people of Lebanon benefiting, and going back to the excellent commentary about a possible sovereign wealth fund. One of the things that really sticks in my mind from my experience as a mediator, long discussions I had with my late dear friend Mohammed Shatta, who had no confidence at all, zero confidence in the ability of any government of Lebanon to handle these revenues equitably. And Mohammed's answer was to create a system patterned after the system used by the state of Alaska in the United States, where revenues, in this case from natural gas, would go directly to Lebanese citizens and not pass through government hands.
Fred. I was.
That's very controversial.
Yes.
Let's say.
They're saying that.
Well, Fred, if I could add, I think whether there's sovereign wealth fund or some other distribution network, I think the only way Lebanese people will ultimately benefit from this resource, if there is a mechanism that is transparent, and that there's an element of governance in terms of the service contracts for these fields. I think we've already read about contracts being given away to shell companies that Lebanese political elites are purportedly involved with. And there will be corruption one way or the other. But, I think the last thing that the United States should want to see, and certainly Lebanon should want to see, is that these funds disappear in the abyss of corruption. Nobody benefits, and perhaps those corrupt people who are already designated or Hezbollah benefit from the patrimony of Lebanon.
But do you both think that Hezbollah will be able to put their hands on the revenues?
Without something new being put into place?
Yes.
And even if something new is put into place, I think it's likely that Hezbollah and its Lebanese allies will see some of this.
Yeah, the difficulty here, of course, is that Hezbollah has become very much part and parcel of an utterly corrupt and utterly incompetent political class, and that's the difficulty here. If you're talking about considerable revenues in the best of all circumstances flowing in starting, 5-7 years from now, whatever.
But the negotiations are taking place with the corrupt political class.
I suspect there's no choice. The Lebanese government and its senior officials must speak for the republic. But there is a time lag here. As one of our panelists mentioned, there have to be resources have to be discovered. Their presence needs to be confirmed, and perhaps in the time it takes for these revenues to start flowing in, the sort of thing advocated by Mohammed Shatta or something else that gives the Lebanese people a better chance than they have now of benefiting from these God-given gifts.
So I guess a rule of law and less corrupt politicians and accountability are what is needed for a better governed resources. And I think if this deal is going to be signed, and we all think that most probably this is a done deal. So all our eyes and efforts and energy should be put on the governance of the resources, if these resources are going to come, and how to manage the resources. This should be the next battle for after this deal, and put the deal behind us and focus on what matters for the Lebanese people, and understand how this deal how will it play politically in the country, because at the end of the day, it's the Trump administration that has started these negotiations with a corrupt class, with people that had been responsible for the August 4 blast, with people that had stolen $100 billion of the Lebanese state coffers, people that were like the cause of the misery of people in the country and the poverty that we're living in. The collapse of this country is caused by the same people that Mr. Trump decided that wanted to go into negotiations with them and help them survive, same as Monsieur Macron did. So the problem is not that anymore. It's what it happened, and it did what it did. Today, it's our responsibility as people of this country and citizens of this country to make sure that these resources, if they come, and these revenues from the resources are well managed. And this is our role, this is the role of civil society, and this is how me and Diana met years ago,
yes,
fighting for the governance of the resources. We've done a beautiful job, and we will continue, and others will continue, because we managed to create that network of
yes,
what we know, we relate to others, so that everyone is talking today about these issues that we first raised. So it's important that our battle is about the survival of the country, and not a political regime that is rotten, and to make sure that this money is not going not only to Hezbollah, only to the others as well, their friends and allies from all sides. So this is our battle. And let me say something, that we need, like, cash transfers, this is another form of clientelism in a country such as Lebanon. The sovereign wealth fund, mismanaged, will lead to nothing. It will lead to these people to get this money and go buy places for them in New York or in Berlin or in Paris. So that is the battle that we need to fight, how to make sure that these people will be held accountable, and we will make sure to have mechanism so that the resources, again, if they come, and the revenues are really well managed, to make sure that we get respectable companies.
Absolutely.
You agree with you agree with
Ms.
Hatayon?
And I'm going to compliment actually what my long-standing friend Lori and really my comrade, if it's now is the word to say, comrade, when it comes to fighting corruption. So it's reforms and the tools she's talking about. We have managed, combined through international organizations. She represents me also beforehand, before also establishing a local one. Contract transparency. Lebanon is the first country in the East Mediterranean to publish its signed contracts. This is something that we can really start from. Beneficial ownership registry. We now have a registry that publishes who the beneficial owners, the real live persons that own and economically benefit from the companies that have taken all goods and service subcontracts to, for example, start the drilling in block number 4. We have a registry that now publishes these names. These are good starting points. No, these are excellent starting points. Now, these will mean nothing if the establishment continues. We need to make sure that we paralyze them through the proper reforms. My job here is not to shoot at a certain entity. It's not, my fight is not with Hezbollah. It's with the corrupt establishment that is part of the problem. Absolutely, absolutely. But it's not the only problem that I have. And I think this is where we are actually what we're trying to say here. Our problem is much bigger. And demarcating or delineating the maritime borders and extracting gas will not resolve it. Yes, it will bring some money, but if we don't have the proper reforms, it will be like pouring water in an empty basket, in a basket that has holes. It will go. And no sovereign wealth fund, and we have precedents to look at. every country that is either goes into bankruptcy and has a sovereign wealth fund, even if it protects it with the best legal framework, the first thing it will do is break into the sovereign wealth fund to close its debts. I actually am thanking my stars we did not extract earlier, because if we had allocated and saved some money by now, then the first thing we would have done, or the state would have done, was tap into the sovereign wealth fund and use the money to further, quelch what they have been stealing. This is not the way forward. Yes, a sovereign wealth fund is needed, but in my case, in this case, we need to make sure that it is governed well, that the mafia that exists is out, so we will be actually able to say in some years to come that we were able to save and use sustainably our natural resources. This is where the real problem is. But before you continue, I'd like to go back to a point that was raised around line 29 and
yes.
how it was pulled as a stunt. I actually... I have a different nuance to that, or a different angle that I'd like to propose. Line 23, as many may not know, was not born on 2020 when we decided to go back, or actually the mediator revisited the whole issue and said, let's go back to the mediating table, negotiating table, and this is where we came up with line 29. Actually, line 29 existed by 2018 after 4 years of the hydrographic department division at the Lebanese Army Forces doing its due diligence and revisiting hydrographically all our offshore. This is how it came about, and they did not stay silent. Actually, they presented it along with the UKHO study to back then Ambassador Satterfield.
But since then we haven't.
But let me just continue on this particular point. Now, my question is, and the dilemma that I'm always revisiting in my head is, why didn't the mediator or the entity that is doing the mediation look seriously at what was proposed in 2018, which was line 29?
That was my question.
I think this is a question that we're all both eager to know what the answer is to.
Maybe the answer is is with Ambassador Harp or Mr. David Schenker.
Well, the definitive answer is not with me, because I left government service on Lebanese Independence Day in November 2012. I suspect that the American team examined line 29 very carefully when it became the Lebanese position. And again, let me clarify.
So it's not a surprise.
In my view, line 29 does not contradict the stipulations of international law. Neither does line 1, line 23, or the Hoff line. There are many mathematical formulas that can be configured to produce the line you want. This is not an exact science. And personally, I feel good. I feel good for Lebanon, and I salute Lebanon for having the final configuration rest on line 23, which was also produced with the help of consultants. And was the Lebanese position for many years before line 29 emerged.
And there was no U.S. mediator in 2018. Satterfield was working to try and restart the negotiations through a framework agreement, which would have allowed for the resumption of negotiations. He didn't get it. I managed to get it in 2020. And by the way, we didn't negotiate. We had a couple of sessions with Ambassador Groscher, the chief U.S. negotiator at the time, and the gaps were too wide. But of course, the principles in this negotiation, I think, contrary to what was said before, we're negotiating with the Lebanese military, and I'm pretty sure the party in Lebanon that was running it was the Lebanese was an officer in the Lebanese armed forces. I'm sure when you're talking about the corrupt elites who we negotiated with, Lori, that you weren't referring to the LAF, or were you?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Basically,
just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, basically, so you know that the Lebanese armed forces were part of the negotiating team with 2 civilians, but the president was heading these negotiations, and the president was taking all the steps, and if you'd like, he was putting the guiding principles, if you want to, like about these negotiations. So basically, at the end of the day, the Lebanese army was the negotiating team, the technical team, if you would like. But at the end of the day, who was benefiting from that? It's the political class, because the political class, Mr. Nabih Berri, who his aid was sanctioned months before the relaunch of the negotiations.
I know, I sanctioned him.
Yes. Yes.
But by the way, if I might add, I mean,
yes,
I think
please.
the most interesting thing to come out of these negotiations, if they succeed, is that on a certain level, Israel's negotiating partner was the FPM and Hezbollah, both of which consented to negotiations with Israel and were involved, having input every step of the way toward reaching this agreement, which essentially, in the end of the day, makes Hezbollah and the FPM economic partners with Israel. And if these entities can basically indirectly negotiate with Israel, I'm not sure why other Lebanese can't talk to Israelis.
So for you, it doesn't matter if they're corrupt or not. The most important objective is that for them to talk to the Israelis.
That's actually a misnomer. I think they would find that profoundly insulting. But I believe it to be true. No, I didn't negotiate this agreement, right? I'm not in power. And in fact, I don't think I would have encouraged an agreement to be in place without some sort of governance for the wealth that might come out of it. I think there is a good chance, and my Lebanese friends tell me, they're very cynical about the prospects of this money actually benefiting the Lebanese people because it's so corrupt.
So you think that Amos Hochstein is not doing a good job?
If I may, there's a bad news, good news element to all of this. The bad news, of course, is that substantial revenues are at least 5 years away, I'm afraid. The good news is that this gives the Lebanese people the opportunity, and it's certainly not going to be easy. It's going to be very perilous, but it gives them an opportunity to move toward the kinds of rule of law and accountability that our panelists refer to.
But if
Indeed.
I may, I would like to go back to what Mr. Schenker said. Do you think that Amos Hochstein is not doing a good job in handling the...
It's not for me to decide. I mean, I personally thought having a mechanism in place to deal with these revenues that would emerge, it was a priority for me, but we didn't make it that far. No, I think it's for the parties to determine whether Hochstein was successful. If he gets an agreement that the government of Lebanon, such as it is, and the government of Israel, such as it is, believe is a deal that is fair and in the interests of their states, then he did a good job.
Then you think that the deal will be reached before elections and presidential elections in Lebanon and election in Israel?
I think there are a lot of pressures to get that agreement before then. I don't know if they will, but it's looking pretty good at the moment.
Okay.
Yep. Good.
Ambassador Hoff, do you think, in retrospect, that Lebanon did a good job in abandoning the Hoff line and adopting line 23?
Good one. I like this question.
I would love to.
I like the question, and I want to hear the answer.
This is a good reason why I've often tried to change the name of that line to the Milevsky line after Raymond Milevsky, a brilliant member of my team, who came up with the methodology for creating it. I mean, look, I think one thing that I don't think has been alluded to during this discussion is that 10 years have been lost. Okay, I think it probably would have been a good idea after I left government for the United States to continue to work in the context of the compromise proposal that was offered, and I think it would have been good for for both Israel and Lebanon to consider adopting that line and leaving open the possibility of future adjustments. After all, it's not a maritime boundary. There are, the two states involved do not have diplomatic relations. It was entirely a provisional line, okay, as the current line under consideration will be. So my sense is that an agreement could have been reached a long time ago. The two leaders at the time, Netanyahu in Israel and Najib Maati in Lebanon.
Well, he's still there. Yes.
Both had strong reservations about our proposed compromise. Both sides felt perfectly justified on scientific and mathematical and international law basis to get everything they were asking for. And even though I think we can all acknowledge there would have been problems with how revenues would have been handled and all of that, given the current circumstances of the Lebanese people, I just think it's a shame that an opportunity was not seized 10 years ago, and that only now do we appear to be coming to closure, with the clock reset once again. Lebanon being at least 5 years away from deriving revenue.
I need to
Lori,
say, I need to
would
add
like
something.
to answer
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
So, Ambassador Hoff, this last decade that you're talking about, we just need to unpack it a bit, because at the end of the day, the not having a maritime border deal was not the cause for not having an oil and gas sector in the country. Because we need to remember in time that you tried to negotiate a maritime border deal in 2012 with them, and then in 2013, we had a political deadlock, again in the country, internal, that has nothing to do with the maritime borders. Yes. We had a caretaker government by Mr. Najib Maati, who refused to pass two decrees that were very important in the government to launch the oil and gas sector. We all remember that. He refused to do that under the pretext that this is a caretaker government. And after that, we couldn't do the parliamentary elections. And after that, we entered into a presidential vacuum. Does it ring a bell with what's happening today? Again,
it absolutely rings a bell. And I think it makes my point that it's a pity that that agreement was not reached in 2012 because the external obstacles to Lebanon developing whatever it is that's out there off Lebanon's coast. We all know that capital is a coward. Capital is a coward.
Yeah. Yes.
And unless prospects of armed conflict are neutralized, it's very difficult for a country, particularly in Lebanon's position, to get started. So yes, I understand. I lived the the downfall of the Maati government and all of that. I understand the impact of all of that, but I think it's still regrettable.
Yes.
That an agreement was not reached in 2012. Both leaders wanted it.
But now we're getting more.
On the Lebanese side, it was just a matter of running out of time.
Ambassador Hoff, but now we're getting more than the Hoff line. So
exactly.
But again,
this is excellent, and I hope whatever marginal additions will be realized 5 years from now prove to be worth
Yes,
the
exactly.
10-year delay. I sincerely hope this is the case.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was trying to make a point that there is a dysfunctional system in the country and that the maritime border was not the cause of the delay, because today, if we miss the opportunity again and again, miss the opportunity with like
big quotes.
Exactly, big quotes, like I'm not sure like how missed opportunity is, but again, if we don't sign before the end of the president mandate, we might end up in the same situation where we will have a caretaker government. We do have a caretaker government, a vacuum, and then we will end up the same thing. The maritime border dispute is not the main factor for not having oil and gas in Lebanon. In 2013, we opened the first licensing round. We closed it in 2018. Companies do care about these things. They do care about where to put their investments. And today we have a problem. Since April 2019, we had a second licensing round that we are postponing and postponing because no companies are investing. Because who is to invest in this country where we have a financial crisis, economic crisis, social crisis, political crisis? So therefore, the maritime border deal is not the key for unlocking the oil and gas sector potential. It might be just for Block 9 today, and that could be that maybe we could find Kana, maybe we would be able to develop it, maybe not.
True.
But there are more internal issues that we have to deal with it, and definitely this is the job of the Lebanese people and the citizens of the country to fight for their country, to fight for a better governance overall, so that we can have a better governance in oil and gas. And if you have revenues, we can manage them.
Absolutely. And
thank you. If there is no maritime agreement, I hope you can successfully make that argument to international energy companies.
Yeah, well, actually,
Jana,
Ambassador,
go ahead.
I let Jana answer that.
We were able to attract two major oil majors, Total and Eni, in 2017 when we launched the first licensing round, finally, after the ratification of the two decrees that Lori talked about, after a stall of 4 years because of the political deadlock. So two oil majors and Novatek, the Russian Novatek, we were able to attract them, and they now have a minimum work commitment. Is this ideal? Definitely not. Are we getting the best deal? No, sir, we are not getting the best deal. We are doing a lot of compromises. We are quite aware of that. But again, Lebanon is lenient, and he is extending or expressing his leniency through really actually giving up more what he should have been getting. You are talking, for example, about, and I want to circle back to 2012, had we taken that deal. If we had taken that deal, sir, we would not have actually been able to get the 350 square kilometers that we might hopefully be taking today by actually attaching or holding on to line 23. We would have had to settle with Hof's line. Now, is this optimal? Again, no, it is not, because if you look at what we were actually putting on the table when we went back to the negotiations, we wanted 1,800 kilometers squared, which is between line 29 and Hof's line. We are walking away with 350 kilometers square from it, which is roughly, if I'm not mistaken, 20% of what we are asking for. So is this a fair deal for Lebanon? Sir, I don't think so. Is this something that we're willing to settle for?
I'm sure that Israel had a line 1. I mean, once again, nobody's going to be happy. In the end,
absolutely.
At the end of the day,
but to portray that we're getting
whether it's worth it.
Yes, but to portray
the fields we're talking about now were not known in 2012.
They became known in 2014.
So perhaps we should wait another 10 years to see what else is out there.
But let me tell you something, sir. When we started and again, as we pointed out from the very beginning, when we started the delineation two principles were at stake. The first one, of course, is the equidistance line, but also the special circumstances. Putting these together, and taking the whole issue around Tekhelet and giving it half effect, we should now be having, or what we proposed was not line 23 actually, but line 23 plus 500 extra kilometers squared. Where does this bring us, by the way? Exactly between Karish and Qana. We couldn't have made a better choice. But again, a lot of factors were playing. We're not going to cry over spilt milk. What we have now is what we have. I think we need to hold on very tight to what we are proposing, not an inch less. If we are proposing certain amendments to the proposed paper or the final negotiated agreement, then really, believe me, this is the least we should be doing.
My last question is for Mr. Schenker. Once the whole maritime border deal is an issue, is resolved, would it be the time for Lebanon to use this momentum to work on its terrestrial borders with Israel and Syria?
Well, listen, this is for Hezbollah to decide. Lebanon, contrary to our wishes, is not a sovereign state. There are non-state actors who are backed by other states who are responsible for issues of war and peace in Lebanon. And so I fear, I think with good reason, that Hezbollah is in no hurry to solve, the blue line. One has no bearing on the other, and of course, the raison d'etre of Hezbollah is Muqawama Islamiyya fi Lebanon. They are the Islamic resistance in Lebanon. If they solve all the borders with Israel, what left is there to resist? Why do they need their weapons? Pointing at Israel to end the occupation that no longer exists. Why would they have to dominate? They are a proxy militia of Iran and are not going to give up their dominance of Lebanon so easily. So I'm really skeptical that this has any positive effect on restarting negotiations on the blue line.
Okay, so
sorry about that.
So what are your recommendations, all in all, for this panel?
Well, listen, if the sides get an agreement that is agreed either by the Lebanese parliament and or by the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, then good for them. But I fear, once again, there are major tensions, structural problems on the border that are not easily solved. I think for Lebanon's sake, I think it's imperative that they undertake reforms so they can get an IMF program and hopefully get out of this hole.
Yeah.
But I am skeptical about that as well. They have more immediate issues and a political elite that is not going anywhere anytime soon, notwithstanding the elections that were held some time ago. The United States, I think, is going to do what it has done, which is work to alleviate the suffering of the Lebanese people by backing the World Bank's social safety net program, by trying to feed the 85% of Lebanese who are now under the poverty line. I think that's what you're going to see from this administration. I think they have limited ambitions for what they believe they can accomplish in Lebanon in the coming period. But I think they're going to say, and perhaps with some reason, that this will diminish short term some of the tensions, but it won't fix any of Lebanon's other long-term problems.
Okay, Ambassador Hoff, what about your recommendations?
Well, my sense, I feel a sense of optimism that it appears that this agreement is finally going to be reached. I think this is it's good for both parties. Potentially, it is especially good for Lebanon. I think reaching this agreement will give the Lebanese people an even greater motivation towards seeking a system that reflects rule of law, accountability, toward building at long last a Lebanese state. And this is my hope, and I am not terribly pessimistic about it.
Lohi Haitayan.
So first of all, since both David and Ambassador Hoff speak Arabic, I say our Speaker of Parliament always says "ما تقول فول تيصير بالمكيول." So I think until we sign a deal, there is no deal. But again, I think because of the pressing timeline, maybe there would be a deal before the vacuum, the presidential vacuum, and before going into the Israeli elections. But recommendations-wise, one recommendation is for the U.S. administration and the international community. Signing this deal should not be a cause for releasing the pressure and easing the pressure on the government of Lebanon when it comes to reforms. The reforms are very important, and today the government and the state and this political class are squeezed into the corner, so that's the best time to get reforms from them. And we see how they're resisting for 3 years and a half. So this deal shouldn't be that carrot in their hands for easing the reforms. Second, to the Lebanese citizens, definitely the government and the political class will use this as a victory and use this as legitimizing it themselves again. We need to continue the fight. The Lebanese people needs to continue the fight for reforms in this country, for better accountability, for better governance, and for better rule of law. And we have to make sure going forward, if the deal happens, to be the watchful eyes when it comes to how the resources will be used and the revenues of these resources later on. Even if this is something that will come maybe in 2 to 5 years or 10 years, we need to start from now. From the day this deal is signed, we need to be ready for the next battle, which is the battle over the transparency, accountability, good governance of the resources and the revenues.
Jana Aiseh.
Yes, but I cannot really do anything except echo what my colleague here, Lori, is saying. But again, maybe my recommendation would be addressed to platforms such as the Maisha Dia Foundation platform. It's an amazing platform. Why? Because it's keeping people aware and making them understand what is really at stake, busting myths that exist just to that are put by the establishment, by the political, mafia, I'd like to call them, unfortunately, but this is the case, so they can persist and stay here. Let's keep the light on. Corruption exists in the darkness. The more we talk about it, the more we are inclusive, the more open and transparent we are about these relevant topics, the less it will be, the more it will be difficult for the corrupt people and unfortunately the ruling class currently to abuse it for their own interest. Nothing will save us except reforms, and the only way to implement these reforms is through the people, the will of the people, to have true representatives of them that are able to speak their mind, are not puppets for the political people.
Thank you, Jana Aiseh. Thank you, Lohi Haitayan. Thank you, Ambassador Hoff. And thank you, Mr. David Schenker. I would also like to thank the Maisha Dia Foundation Media Institute, as well as the Public Affairs section at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut for organizing this panel. Thank you for watching.